Why are historians so hesitant to say that historical figures were gay? It's a running joke on the internet to see two gay characters in the movie and then someone will comment, historians will say they were best friends, as a commentary on how people will sometimes brush away evidence of historical figures' queerness. But the reality is that this phenomenon is less about historians trying to erase queerness and more about how our perception of romance and intimacy has shifted in the past couple hundred years.
Yes, and those aren't the only reasons that queerness is diminished and ignored. Bias, whether unconscious or intentional, plays a huge role in historical narrative, and the way that a community or a nation or an empire tells its history is a crucial tool for structuring power. Welcome back to Yesterqueers. My name's Amanda, and I'm a public historian of queer history. This creator is absolutely correct that our understandings of intimacy, sexuality, eroticism, and romance have evolved and are continuing to do so. There was a time in the 18th century, for example, when it was believed that men were the ones who had the capacity to form emotionally intimate platonic friendships. It's why so many of the letters from our founding fathers sound romantic to modern audiences, even though they're not. She's also correct that historians, at least the diligent ones, work very hard not to impose modern concepts on historical figures. It's why I use language like they may have identified as bisexual today, rather than just saying they were bisexual. I do that specifically to connect our modern language to a historical figure's lived experience in a time before that language existed. So yeah, both of those things do play a part in why historians say that people were just good friends, but I'd argue that they play a relatively minor part compared to the impact of myth-making and of bias, specifically heteronormativity and Eurocentrism. I've said in other videos that I don't tell stories from cultures of which I'm not a part unless I can find research from people of those cultures to help me contextualize the stories. I do that because I know that the lens through which I view the world has a default setting, and even if my intention is to see beyond my own biases, I don't know what I don't know. I could gloss over a detail in research and never recognize its significance, whereas a person with cultural knowledge would immediately flag that same detail as an important part of the story. A historian who is straight and cis, especially one who is steeped in heteronormative culture, is generally hardwired to view same-gender couples as platonic friends. In the best case scenario, it might not even occur to them that there's more to be investigated. And in the worst, they will actively refuse to look deeper because of their feelings about queerness. The study of history has, until very recently, been locked behind university doors, and to this day it's overseen by academics who are mostly white, mostly men, mostly cis, and mostly straight, so they all share a very similar default lens. That lens determines not only how history is understood, but what history is worthy of study in the first place. The discussion of diverse genders in indigenous cultures wasn't left out of American history books because historians were being too careful with gender. It was left out because Eurocentric historians didn't think that Native nations had any history or culture worth understanding. The people who created the American myth were not only profoundly incurious about people who they saw as lesser, not just indigenous people, but women, black people, queer people, etc. But they also feared the destabilizing influence of history that didn't align with the narrative being used to build and maintain power. And that is not specific to America. For example, the official position of the Russian government is that Tchaikovsky was straight, in spite of mountains of evidence to the contrary. Because admitting that one of Russia's national heroes was a gay man would undermine the militantly homophobic and transphobic stance of the Russian government. The existence of queer genders, sexualities, and lifestyles throughout history is what Susan Stryker calls disruptive knowledge, information that challenges the way a person views and understands the world. Queer history has been erased and diminished not because historians were being too cautious in their analysis, but because queer history is disruptive. Stories of people who were more than just good friends thriving outside of a society's rigid structure are a threat to the status quo. That's it for today. As always, more information, including sources and further reading, is available in the usual place.